I'll be adding color to this rough sketch that I did and applying the things that I've been showing you with the previous examples. But before I start with that, I want to do some things on this cube here. Now, if, for example, the cube were blue and the light source remains white, that blue at the top is going to remain as it is, because it is not mixing with the color of the light source, because the light source is white. The side plane would also not change color in any way, since the light source is white. So I'm just quickly adding that darker blue to the side. And then, of course, the shadow will have an even darker blue, but it won't be changed by the color of the light source, since the light source is white. And I'll just pick up a darker blue from the color picker and quickly add that to the shadow side. So the blue hasn't been changed on any of the planes in terms of it changing hue because of the color of the light source mixing with the blue. Now, turning my attention to this warrior with his helmet, let's say you're going to paint this in color. You need to consider the things that I talked about right over here: the local color, the color of the light, intensity of the light, the direction of the light, and the temperature of the light. So my local color is going to be, let's say, blue, and the color of the light is going to be yellow, the direction of the light somewhere around here maybe, and the intensity of the light will be a strong yellowish light, and the temperature of the light is warm, since it's a warm yellow, not a cool yellow. Cool yellow is a yellow that leans a bit toward the green, the yellow-green. But this is a warm yellow, so I can now begin to add color, and I'm going to do this quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time painting this. I'll start out with a local color, and as I said, blue, so maybe something like this. And I'm placing it on a color layer from the color mode menu. I selected color, and this enables me to just quickly color this grayscale by applying the blue over the whole painting. Since it's a blue local color and the light source is yellowish, the complementary color of the yellow light source, which is violet, mixes into the local color, which is blue. So I pick up a little of that violet here from the color wheel, get the right intensity and value, and then add a little bit of that to the blue. Also, this blue needs to shift in color a little toward the color below it on the color wheel. So over here on the color wheel, you see the blue, and it shifts a little toward the blue violet. But by me adding a little of the complementary color of the yellow light, which is violet, to this blue, I'm already shifting that blue toward the blue violet. So I'm adding a little bit of that violet to the blue, as you can see, and it's changing the blue a little bit, but not that much. I don't want it to become a violet shadow, although I could exaggerate the shadow color, remove the local blue color, and just replace it with the complementary color of the yellow light, so that the shadow appears violet all over. But I'm not going to do that, so I just have to get the right mixture here of the violet with the blue. And now for the side that is being struck by the light, which is this side, of course, and the yellow will mix with the blue, therefore turning that blue slightly toward the blue-green that you see here on the color wheel. The color is moving up in the direction of yellow. It's shifting from the blue that you see here on the color wheel to one color above it. But again, it's not going to be a blue-green that you see here. It's just going to be a tinge of yellow mixing with the blue and turning the blue ever so slightly toward the color above it on the color wheel, toward blue-green. What I'm going to do is pick up the blue from the helmet that is on the right side where the light is going to hit that helmet, and then I'll add just a touch of the yellow, just a little bit, like that, and then I can pick that up and go to the color picker, and I can see what that looks like, and if it needs to be changed, I'm going to raise the value. So I'm making this a tint of the blue. Needs to be a lighter value since light is hitting this part of the helmet. Now if the light is very strong, the color gets washed out. If the light is weaker, you still see more of the color. Now the light isn't so strong that it would wash out this blue. So you're still going to see the blue. But the blue has been altered just a little bit because of that yellow light source. Now I could add more yellow, which would change that blue a little more toward the green, or the blue-green. Now if there's a lot of yellow within the light source, then more yellow is added to the local color. But I don't have a really saturated yellow here. For example, if I picked up the yellow from the color wheel and added that over here, you'd see how much more saturated that color is. Matter of fact, I have to increase the saturation even more. So if the light source were more like this, then this blue would change even more toward the blue-green because there would be a lot more yellow within that blue because of the strong yellow light source. But since the light source doesn't have that kind of saturated yellow, it's more like this, then that blue isn't altered all that radically. A little more yellow needs to be added to this blue because right now it looks a little too cool, and that blue is being warmed up by the yellow light, so therefore it needs to be warmed up by adding a little more yellow to it. And I could do it like this. I could pick up the blue that is there now, go to the color picker, and then with the color slider over here, move that slider down in the direction toward yellow. So I'm adding a bit more of the blue-green to the blue, which means that there's more yellow within that blue. Because when you add yellow to blue, it turns green. So now I can see what that looks like, and it's been warmed up a bit. You see, it looks somewhat warmer now than it did before. I'm going to color the sky orange. The sky is a good place where you can use imaginative color. Don't always have the sky looking blue. Now, when the blue of the helmet is seen against its complementary color orange, which this is, through what is called simultaneous contrast, the blue helmet appears even more blue looking. It actually intensifies. The blue intensifies through simultaneous contrast. The orange creates an after image of color, which is blue. So that blue after image is seen against the blue that is already here on the helmet. And therefore that blue becomes intensified. Watch what happens when I remove the orange background. The blue doesn't look as saturated as it does when the orange color is there. You see the difference? It's subtle, but it's there. When using complementary colors, each color intensifies the other color. Now I'll add some more of this lighter and warmer blue. There are warm blues and there are cool blues. By adding a little yellow to the blue, it is warmed up somewhat. So I'm adding some over here, as you can see, to that part of the helmet, and some of that blue over here as well. Now what I need to point out to you is that this blue is actually the halftone blue. Remember what I said about the halftone when I talked about the cube here? This part is the halftone, the color between the lightest part of the cube and the darkest part of the cube. But now I need to add the lightest part of this helmet, which when you look at the cube over here is this top plane right there, as you know. So therefore, the lightest part of this helmet will have a lighter value than the halftone, and it will be warmer in color as well, because it will be receiving more of the light. So what I can do is I can pick up that halftone color from the helmet, go to the color picker, but then I have to change the hue a little bit and move the color slider even further down than I did before, and the little circle up more to lighten the value. And now I can see what that looks like by adding it to the helmet, and I think it needs to be made even lighter in its value, because this part is receiving most of the light, like this. You can see that that blue leans more toward the blue-green than this blue does, because it is receiving more of the yellow light. If the light is very strong, then I would add even more white to that color like this, where the color begins to become washed out, so that it looks like that, where you can hardly see any of that color of the helmet anymore. But the light isn't that strong in my picture here, so I don't want the color to be washed out completely. So maybe I can go a little bit lighter. And I think that might be good for now. By doing that, you can also see that there is more color variety here now. It's very important that you get this color variety into your color work, because that adds a lot of interest. I'll add the shadow core here, right there. See that darker part that I'm adding? It's the shadow core. And what I could also do is add some reflected light. The color of reflected light, in this case, could maybe be a green. And there's something over here toward the left side that is out of range of the picture that is causing that green to be reflected into the shadow side here. You see that little bit of green that I just added? And that is coming from some source outside of the picture over here on the left side. And by adding that green to the color that's already there, I've increased the color variety and thereby added more interest to the painting. Color variety adds interest. I'm going to darken this part a little more. Now this is just a rough color sketch to show you what I did with the cube and the building, but applying it to an actual painting here of this warrior with his helmet. The color of the sky also reflects its color into the shadow of a form, just like I showed you with the cube and the building. So therefore, some of this orange color could be put into the shadow side of the helmet, just a little bit toward the edge here, and a little down here as well, Now this adds additional color to the color that's already there, increasing the color variety even more. Now this part here needs to be made a little bit darker, where his clothing is right here. And now highlights need to be added here on the light side. So I'm going to pick up that lighter color, go to the color picker, and make that color even lighter, something like this. The color of specular highlights, which this one is going to be, is a combination of the color of the light source as well as the local color of the form. So that means I'm going to be adding a bit more yellow to this color, and I'm going to put down the more saturated part of the highlight first. You can see that that color is somewhat saturated. It has white in it, but not so much that you don't see a saturated color. So I'm adding that over here. The highlight is placed on that part of the form that is closest to the light. Soften the edge. And now I'll go back and add more white to that color, which makes it even more of a tint, a lighter value, but I'm not going all the way to the white. I'm leaving a little bit of color within that highlight, and I'll add that right over that more saturated part of the highlight. Then I'll just smooth out or blend some of this color together with the highlight, like that. Each different surface on a form, such as this surface and this one and this one and this one, will have their own highlights. So therefore, I can place a highlight here. But before I do that, I'm going to enlarge this section where that highlight is that I just placed. And you can see that this part here, you see that part, that has a more saturated looking color than this part. That's the hot spot of the highlight that has the least amount of color in it. Therefore, it looks white or almost white. This is just a rough color sketch, not doing a finished painting because it would take too long and I wouldn't be able to get to those things that I still want to show you. So it's better to just focus on doing a quick rough color sketch and then moving on to something else. Now, what I want to do in addition is add some more highlights. So first I'll pick up that more saturated part of the highlight from here and then add it over here like that, and then over here and up here and up here, over here, here. Now I can, well, here too. Now I can pick up that hot spot on that highlight, the one that looks almost white but isn't quite white, and then I can add that right over the more saturated part of the highlight. You see what I'm doing? And that finishes off the highlight. Makes it look more like a highlight. To add some additional color, a color accent could be added, and maybe there's some red here, which suggests blood, that he was in a battle. So just a suggestion of that red adds this color accent. So now I have even more color, adding to the color that's already there, providing color variety and therefore more interest. You could also add what is called a kick light to the shadow area, and the kick light is a secondary light that is weaker than the key light. Now, this is the key light because it is the main light illuminating this form. So there's the key light and there's the kick light, the secondary light, the weaker light, which is the kick light. Now, the kick light could be a red light like this, for example, that is shining into the shadow and illuminating that shadow a little bit like this, while the key light illuminates this side of the form to a much greater degree. But you can see that by adding that kick light, the head now has gained in interest because of this contrast that exists now between this red, warmer kick light and the cooler blue in the shadow. And I could strengthen the shadow a bit by adding that core shadow. The darker part of a shadow is the core shadow. You see it right there? And you see by adding that core shadow, the shadow side of the form looks even more like a shadow now. Using complementary colors together to form accent colors is very effective. So I have this red on the head, but in order to increase interest even more and to add even more excitement through color contrast, the complementary color to red can be added. So it's a good idea to always add complementary colors to give a little bit more excitement to the picture. And I'm going to pick up the green from the color wheel and add that right over here. You see right there? And the part that is in the light will have a more saturated green leaning toward the yellow-green. And the part that is in the shadow will be leaning toward the blue-green. Remember, there's a color shift that occurs when colors go into the light or into the shadow. So I just have to get the right value and saturation for the shadow side here. I lowered the saturation a little bit on the green here, and I think you can see that it makes an interesting color accent when seen together with the red. So always add the complement of a color so that you have these two colors that complement each other, which, as I mentioned, will add a note of excitement to the painting. And they can act as color accents that will help draw the eye to a particular part of the picture. I think I'm going to darken this lower part here, where his clothing is, and suggest that he's wearing some kind of fur coat, maybe, with these lines that suggest fur. That's just very rough. Now for the background, what I'm going to do is repeat these spikes. It's a good idea to repeat some of the shapes that you find within the main subject in the background. And this helps to further connect the background to the main subject. So you see these spikes here? They're similar to the spikes on his helmet. And this helps to further relate him to the background and the background to him. And then I can darken this part here. Helps to lead the eye in, and the dark here at the corner helps to keep the eye within the picture. So I need to darken it even more. So you can see what I did here. I reduced the amount of the red kick light, so there isn't so much of that red light shining into the shadow. I'm going to remove the yellow sun because it's attracting too much attention away from the head. And when you place a strong contrasting element like the sun in the corner of the picture area, the way the sun was situated, it will draw the eye of the viewer out of the picture. So now more attention is directed on the head, and there isn't a strong competing element that draws the eye away from the head like the sun did. Within this head you find warm and cool color contrasts, which give a vibrancy to color and adds a lot of color interest to a painting when you do this. The warm red kick light with the cool shadows and the green, as well as the orange background with the blue of the head. All of this warm, cool color contrast adds vibrancy and color variety and color interest to the painting. This is what you need to try to get into your color work, this kind of warm, cool color contrast. Now, while there is warm and cool color contrast on the head, you don't find that kind of warm, cool color contrast in the background. So what I need to do is to add some blue found on the head within the orange color of the background, which I'm going to do now, but I just have to find the right color and value, the right blue. And it should be a blue that is of a similar value to the value of the orange color. Otherwise, you're going to break up the overall value that has been established for the background. What you would wind up with, if the values were different, would be like a patchwork of different colors. And you would lose the unity established by a similar value, a similar overall value. So I'm adding a little bit of the blue, but I have to change that again. Let's see what this looks like. Just hints of that blue, which helps to add interest and give a little bit of color vibrancy to the background color through this contrast. And already you can see how the blue of the head relates better to the background now. There's more color variety within the background. Some blue can be a little more intense, other blues a little more muted. Create some variety. And down here also on the ground you can add some blue, and a little bit of blue here and there will also help to increase the feeling of depth. If you've studied the principles of design, you'll know that one of those principles is dominance. And in this rough color sketch, there is no dominance of one particular hue over another. The orange color takes up about as much area as the blue does. So therefore, there's no dominance of one hue over another. In order to achieve dominance, it needs to appear as though there is more of one hue than another. And I want there to be more blue than the orange. So I'm going to add some blue to this landscape back here, thereby increasing the amount of blue within this rough color sketch and creating, therefore, a dominance of blue. So I'll add some blue to that background, and I just have to get the right value and intensity for that blue, letting some of the orange peek through to add some color variety. And then on the other side, so it's a lighter valued blue. In the course of doing a painting, many changes are made. And one of those changes I just made, and in addition to that, another change is going to be made, and that is removing that red there from the kick light so that this part of the picture has blue against blue. So there's the blue of his costume and then the blue of the background. And when you place blue against blue, there isn't any hue contrast. But then when you look up here where the helmet is, you see that there is a strong hue contrast because there is the blue of the helmet and then the orange of the sky. So up here there's hue contrast, while down here where there is blue against blue, there isn't any hue contrast. So the eye will go toward that area within a picture where there is a greater amount of hue contrast, which means that the eye will be attracted to this upper part more so than this lower part of the picture, because that's where the strong hue contrast occurs. Now if I had kept the red kick light color over here like this, then I would have a strong hue contrast within this area as well, because red and blue form strong hue contrast. And I don't want the eye to be attracted here. This is an unimportant part of the picture. This up here is more important, so I want the stronger hue contrast to occur up here, in that part of the picture that is more important, rather than here. If you remember, I mentioned earlier that it is important that the foreground form be related to the background. And one of the ways I did that was by repeating those spike shapes on the helmet back here. But in addition to that, to form an even greater bond between the foreground and the background in terms of color, some of that color of the background needs to be brought into the color of the foreground. And what I can do is add orange to part of his helmet. Now I just have to select the correct orange color and apply it over this part of his helmet. And that may be a little too dark, so I'll change the color a little bit. Maybe something like this. I think that works better. And then also down here, where you see part of his face, his lips, his beard, could have some of that color in there as well. Now this part I'll erase. There's no orange color on that part. Then I can add a brighter orange color to that part of the helmet here that is receiving more light. Give it some form. And add a highlight. Adding the highlight the way I showed you earlier. Right now, there's too much hue contrast right here and here. Since I changed the ground to a blue, and this part is in orange, it's a tint of orange, but nevertheless it is a contrasting hue to the blue, so this part attracts quite a bit of attention because of that strong hue contrast, and as well over here. Now, what do you do in a case like that? I don't want a lot of attention drawn to this part or this part. It's the head where I want the attention directed toward more than anywhere else. So what can be done is that instead of having this tint of orange, I could have a tint of blue that gradually turns into the orange color. So there's a gradation of blue to orange. And I'll show you what that looks like. First I have to get the right blue, a lighter value, and grade somewhat. That might be a little too saturated. Maybe something like this. And then it gradually fades into the orange like that. So there's a gradation of blue to the orange color. But now I have blue against blue, which doesn't create a strong hue contrast and therefore doesn't attract the eye there as much as it did before when there was a strong hue contrast, orange and blue. So now I just have to work on this area here, and I'll add that grade tint of blue to the other side as well, and it also gradually fades into the orange color, mixing with it like this. Now I have blue on blue, which doesn't attract a lot of attention, and then I have to apply some atmospheric perspective, as it's called, if you're familiar with that. Soft edges. And the forms in atmospheric perspective are not made very distinct. I made some additional changes and added some detail. Now what I want to point out to you is that where the light turns to shadow, such as here for example, right at that edge, the turning edge, or the terminator as it's sometimes referred to, that's where you're going to find more saturated color. And for this color here, the orange, I'll pick that up, that muted orange, and then make it a bit more intense in color, more saturated. Something like this maybe. And maybe a little more. You see how more saturated that part of the form is than this part here that's more in the light? So the more saturated part actually occurs where the light turns to shadow and not within that part that receives most of the light. And that goes back to the halftone that I talked about when I was talking about what happens on this cube, for example, as well as on this helmet, where this part here is the halftone. It's the part that actually is more saturated in color than that part that receives a strong light falling on it and thereby desaturating the color a little bit. Now you can see that on the highlight here, the most saturated part, as I mentioned earlier, is found around the lightest part of the highlight. Right there, you see? That part right there. And then right here is where you get that tint of that more saturated color. This is where the lightest value occurs. It's the hot spot of the highlight. But the color surrounding the highlight, which is this here, needs to be darker in value and less saturated. Otherwise, the highlight isn't going to show up. See how less saturated this part is than that part? And then the least saturated is right here, where that hot spot is, where it looks like the highlight is white. but it's not really white, it's an off-white. I'll pick up that highlight, go to the color picker, and you can see that it's not really white. That little circle hasn't been moved all the way to the corner, which would make it white. There's still a little bit of color within that light spot on the highlight. And you can see that by adding that more saturated color here, where the light turns to shadow, I've added more color variety. Additional color has been added. And then I can soften that edge if I want by blending it. I'm going to soften the edge with the smudge tool just a little bit like that. And I think that's about it. Now I'll go back down to actual size. I think I'm going to make a change in color. Instead of this blue back here, I think it's going to work better with a green. So I made a quick change, as you can see, and I think that green works better than the blue. It contrasts better with the red kick light and the red accent here, and also provides a variation on the green that I placed here. So there's a darker, cooler green here, a warmer, more saturated green here, and then there's this grayer, lighter green in the background. So all these different greens add interest. Whenever you have a gradation of a color, whether in terms of its intensity, hue, or value, interest is increased. I think that's all I'm going to do on this rough color sketch. I could carry it further to a finished painting, but that would take too long,